Good morning, guys. Well, it's a nice cool morning. I knew when it came in and rained it was going to turn around and turn cool right after. This way it is when it's a cold, wet winter in Alabama. But in this video I wanted to just take a moment and then speak to the silver wolves a second, because so many of you have reached out to me to talk about and ask questions about the hot tent idea. And I will be doing another hot tent here very shortly, a more in-depth about just the tent, the setups, etc. Do an overnighter with it. I'm going to try to do it this weekend. We're going to see how life gets in the way. But like most of you who are silver wolves, got the old aches and pains. And it's because of the old broke bones, damaged this, dislocated that way back. You got a life that's got a little poetry in your soul, as my granddaddy used to call it. And because of that, everything hurts. Well, going camping, as many of you probably feel the same way I do. When I get there and it's cold and you come away from the fire and you go to get into your sleeping bag or whatever, that laying there and having to warm it up, that shivering while you're trying to warm up the bag, and all these old bones and arthritis and everything just hurts. And even though you finally do get warm, you're never really warm, you know what I mean? That shoulder still hurts, that hand still hurts, that hip still hurts, whatever. Knees. And so, part of my experiment with using this hot tent, because like I said, I was not going to use it as a fuel source all night. It was just going to be to warm it up in the morning or in the evening. And it worked perfectly for that. That was one of the reasons I chose such a small wood stove, because I wanted it to have really kind of a short duration burn, so I could set it up, utilize, and it would cool down quickly. Excuse me, so when I'm ready to go, I could be able to dump it out, the ashes, and it cool down, as opposed to a great big firebox that might take a while to cool down or burn up, you know. So I went in and I fired up my wood stove using a tinder bundle. I just made up a tinder bundle that would just fit in the door, and right through the middle of it I put some of those wax pucks in the middle, so that once I lighted it would change that. There's a couple pieces of fat lighter in there as well. And so I could just light the end of it, you know, stick it in there, light the end of it, get it going and close the door and let it draft and burn. So I set that up and I went back outside by the fire where everybody was sitting talking. I could look at the smokestack and I watched good smoke, and when it dropped down, that's when I came back in and I re-stoked it up. And that time I stoked it up with thumb-sized pieces, you know, filled it up good, shut the door. I had a bed of coals going now, right? Went back out and I had good smoke, and that ran for 30-40 minutes, something like that. I wasn't really timing it, but you get the idea. And when the smoke dropped down, I went back in, and this time I put stove wood in it. And that was up to as big as that coffee cup I put into it. And it probably going to run an hour or so on that, 45 minutes to an hour. Well, the whole time this is doing it, since I've got that hammock in there and I've got a ridge line, I had draped my sleeping bag over the top of that. Well, that put it in the top of the tent. That's where all the heat's going to be at, right? And of course, my underquilt is already on my hammock, and it's getting warm in there. And of course, I'm zipping the tent up every time I go in and out. And so after that final stoking, I went back to the fire. I was out there for maybe 20-30 minutes tops, you know. And then it was time to go to bed, and I came in, and that hot tent was nice and warm. It was like 75 or 80, and outside it was 28 with wind chill down like at 18. So yeah, it was like walking into a hot house. But it allowed me to sit down in my chair and strip down and put on my bone dry sleeping pair of long handles. They were going to be against my skin. And that was always a problem in regular camping, because you got to have something that bone dry against you. And so you're ready to go to bed, and so you got to go, you know, get your clothes and either by the fire do this in front of everybody, or you have to go to your tent, strip down, put that on, you're sitting there shivering, and run back to the fire to warm up before you go to bed. By doing this hot tent, I was able to go in there, sit down in a chair, disrobe, change to my bone dry socks, underwear, long handle set against me, put my layers on that I wanted, get into my hammock, reach up and pull down that sleeping bag, and that sleeping bag was as warm as if it had just come out of a dryer. And I was able to just drape it over me, and the fire's still going. You know, it was nice, warm, perfect in there. And because I was warm and I didn't have to use my body energy to heat up my blankets, to heat up my underquilt and everything, I was a lot more comfortable, a lot more warm. And the bones weren't aching as bad, because, you know, you pull that nice warm thing over you, and it's just like having a hot towel on you. You know, my joints felt a little bit better. And so I snuggled on up in there and I went to sleep. And that stove kept popping probably another 30, 40 minutes. As you're half asleep and you hear it popping. And then when I woke up early in the morning, I was a little cold, like 6 or 7 hours later, but I wasn't cold, I was just cool, and it was that strip right down the middle, because I needed additional underquilt that I didn't quite have. I was toasty warm on the top, but that was the strip, and that was not the stove or the tent's fault. It was because of that underquilt and that blanket worked, but probably needed just a little bit much. It was cool enough that you woke up, but it was not so cold you couldn't go back to sleep, and it didn't make me hurt. Understand what I'm saying? Whereas if I'd came into that cold tent and laid down and covered up, I'd probably woke up a dozen times that night hurting, because you just never get your joints and your bones to warm up. So, for those of you that have asked me, is it really worth it? I would say yes. I think it's given me a couple more years by using this to be able to go out there and camp in winter conditions, which is my favorite time of the year, because of the one stumbling block was that getting into bed cold to me, that I really dreaded. And now that's not a factor anymore. Now, were I in colder country where I was going to need to stay in that tent and keep that fire going, I could do it with this little bitty thing, but that's when I'd go for the bigger firebox, the bigger wood stove. Because this little one is perfectly fine for what I was using it for, is a heater. To just heat the space up and get it warm enough to point X and then go out. Now in the morning, I should have another tinder bundle already wrapped up with jute and ready to go, where I can just open up the door, slide it in, light it, and close the door. Like roll out of my warm sleeping bag, open the door, stick it in, hit it with a lighter, close the door, open up your vent, and lay back down and cover back up and wait for the tent to warm up, so that I can then get up, change clothes, do my breakfast. Go ahead and set the coffee cup with coffee in it up on top of the stove, let it heat it up. So when I got up, you'd have hot coffee, etc. That's how I'm going to run that little wood stove. But I really think it's extended my time being able to use this little stove and this hot tent concept, because in the coming video that I'm going to show you of the various configurations I've already seen in my mind of how to set this thing up where it could be used year-round as a big tarp, as a big tent, as an awning, as a place with a porch, as a big A-frame. I'll show all this when I set it up for this weekend. But I really think it's going to make it where I can do winter camping better than I have been for the last couple of years, because of the body aches, because of the old arthritis and aches and pains, of being able to have a warm bed to get into. And once I'm in it, I can keep it warm. But it's the warming it up that I really just dreaded, going in there and laying down in that ice cold bag. And even though it was really good bags, but the fact that And of course I talked about bringing them out and holding the bags by the fire to warm them up, and that helped to some point, but this hot tent was 10 times better, guys. I mean, really, 10 times better, and it made it so much easier for me to do this. Well, I just wanted to address that because so many of you Silver Wolves have reached out to me saying that you're thinking about it, of getting you one. Now, there's several companies that make them. One Wind makes this one, and I believe it's called the Penumbra, and I'll put the name right down here. And they retail for about $1.99, and it comes with the stove jack that is the one with a hole for the stovepipe, and they've got a replacement that you just pop out and pop in with Velcro, the clear. So in the summertime when you're not using it for a stove hole, you can seal that up, see, and just use it like a window if you wanted to, or use it as a regular tarp so water doesn't come in that hole. And thus far I've been very happy with it. Mrs. Blackie will probably be using it at my gathering because she's got her own little private potty that we've talked about in videos. And be able to set this up where it can be wide open, or just take the two zippers, zip, zip, and it's a fully enclosed tent where she can have her privacy. It's a great advantage because I can open it up, it's wide open, or I can zip it closed and I'm fully enclosed. Best of both worlds. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you have, please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And until the next time, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.